Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by retired Chief Patrick Flannelly.
Right on, Eric. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Patrick, you are not only a retired chief, you are the host of the Coptimizer podcast. You run a blog. You have your hands in a lot of different things trying to put out good information. So, just want to ask you a little bit about that. If you can give a little bit of a summary for folks listening, where they can find you, and what was the driver and the impetus to all this?
Sure. For those that know me, this is probably not a surprise because I'm one of those irritating guys that likes to read and likes to learn new things. And then,
so
of
annoying.
Course, once I do that, I have to share it with everybody. So that it's just, it's a blessing and a curse, I guess, in many ways. I just have a curious mind, and I have a passion for policing. It started when I was young, and I did 4 years in the Air Force in the security police, and then got out, went to college, went to Purdue University, bartended, managed a restaurant, and then started my policing career in 1995. So, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things throughout my whole career. I've had this lifelong learning addiction, and fortunate in some ways that I stumbled on some good information early on that I think we'll probably touch on a lot today in terms of wellness and performance. But I mean, from a career perspective, my career probably looks like a lot of police officers in terms of, the trajectory in terms of, I spent most of my career working in patrol, and almost all of that time on the night shift, working nights. I loved working nights. That's all I ever wanted to work. And then did 4 years working narcotics, a year in community outreach, and my last 10 years as chief of police.
Nice. Well, that's a fantastic crash course, and we're going to dive into these different kind of subsections. But I love how you highlighted the curious mind, right? That perpetual learner. It's something I was actually just talking to a guy I'm coaching, and that invitation to stay curious. And it is that kind of, a little bit of the corny, like, hey, it's about the journey, not the destination. But I think that with that embracing of curiosity, like, you get that, right? You're continually honing in, you're continually learning a new pursuit, a new passion. And then, you're running over the hilltops and shouting it, for all to hear because you care. And that's fantastic. And I love even the word, the term Coptimizer, right? Because, when I started learning more about wellness, truly through the veins of first responder work and needing to, I felt very much like focusing on being optimal or optimizing could be the lower hanging fruit for some that don't care about, health or wellness, but do they want to be effective? Like, certainly, like, who doesn't want to be a better cop, a more effective human, right?
Absolutely. And, I tell a story a lot to people I coach, and then just others when I'm out training. I would like to say that I'm fortunate because I stumbled into some good information, but most of the people that know me from the later part of my career only know me as the fitness fanatic, the guy that loves to work out, that's always talking about nutrition and, technology and other things. But those that knew me when I was young know a different Pat. And I, colloquially will call him Fat Pat and out of shape Fat Pat. And I wrote about it recently on my Coptimizer blog. When I had a great interview with a woman who's lost 160 pounds. And, just the short version of that story was I felt, in that interview, and I've known this woman for a few years. We've communicated in a group that I belong with. And I was kind of disappointed in myself because there is an example of somebody that I had knowledge that could have helped her in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I didn't reach someone like her. But we have so many in our profession that are suffering. I mean, truly suffering, not just from a physical perspective, but a mental, emotional, and spiritual perspective as well. And all of those things impact performance. Had I not stumbled upon the right pieces of information at the right time and just kind of figured a few things out through trial and error, I could have just as easily been that person. And quite frankly, most likely, if I would have maintained some of those lifestyle habits that I had when I was young, I wouldn't be here having this conversation today.
Yeah.
And I could, and we can get into lab work later, but I'll explain why. There's a very good likelihood that I would have been a statistic.
Yeah.
And not known. So that's why I feel very fortunate that I'm a curious learner.
Yeah, I even like that take. I want to focus in on that for a sec because I what I hear in that is this open-mindedness to opportunities, and a lot of times there are folks that maybe don't pay themselves enough credit, but also don't pay their circumstance enough credit. But I think that not to hyperanalyze, but just to say, hey, like there's a lot of inputs, there's a lot of environment that I had. I'm fortunate and grateful for the course that I had and the opportunities and the learning and the initiative I had. But at the same time, like when you said that in myself, I felt some things that, yeah, did I have everything laid out for me for an easy life? Certainly not. But at the same time, I had a lot of opportunities. At the same time, when I think about something health related, like you were mentioning, lifestyle wise, yeah, like I was a skinny fat kid and unathletic and crushing a sleeve of Oreos, and that may have stayed with me if I didn't have good influences around me, right? Like, and I'm not throwing shade at my parents. Like they gave me healthy food when they could, when they cooking dinners and home cooked meals
Yep.
and such. But being a latchkey kid, in the '90s, like I was left to my own devices. And much to the chagrin of my mom, who was trying to monitor that stuff. But if she bought it, I was going to crush it. At the same time, being in
Yep.
college, where you truly have to, own your own destiny in a lot of ways, being away from home. Yeah, I got into heavy drinking with my buddies, and I'm fortunate that it didn't get excessive to the point where, I was angry or I was violent or I created this abuse disorder within myself, right? Luckily, I didn't have those types of addictions, but certainly a lot of people do. And so, yeah, not to go too much on the tangent, but I really like how you reflected on that because I think that people can gain a lot from thinking about their own lives in that way.
Yeah, and I can sound preachy at times, and if I could go back, especially to my younger days as a supervisor in policing, there are things I would change about my approach, and I think I did soften that much, later in my career. Some people may disagree with that, but I always had high expectations for myself and for people around me. But what I never really wanted to do is belittle or make somebody feel bad for their circumstances, and because everybody's carrying something, right? We don't know what your struggles are. I don't know what's going on at home. What your upbringing was. Everybody has baggage, and it impacts us in different ways. But from a policing and a leadership perspective, if I could provide people the right resources and try to remove barriers and excuses, then hopefully we could, really just kind of almost, if you think about herding cattle in a sense, you don't need them all in a straight line. You don't need them marching in step. You just need them moving in the right direction, and eventually, you find the greener pastures where you're trying to go. And I think that's really all that later in my career, that was my approach. But I'm fortunate again to have learned from some of these things, and I'll give you an example, right? Like you said, in even late in high school, I had, this was in the 80s, right? I could party on the weekends. I used to smoke. I used to drink. I ate whatever you put in front of me. I'm the youngest of 8 from an Irish family, so by the time I was at that age, my parents were probably pretty much worn out.
They're exhausted.
Yeah. And I came from a great family, great home. There was no trauma or anything like that in the home. I just had really bad habits, and I was really underperforming. I wasn't meeting my potential. And so luckily, for me, 4 years in the military, it really took me all 4 years in the military to kind of work some of that stuff out. And I wouldn't even say I worked it all out, but I at least recognized in myself, like, I'm not on the path that's going to really optimize my future or provide the best future for me. Or quite frankly, I might not even get to do the things that I want to do, because I always wanted to work in law enforcement. But, you go out a night of drinking, one DUI, one bad decision, something like that, and that can completely derail, or at least back then it certainly would derail you. I think now there's more opportunities for people, but yeah, I'm just lucky. I made it through. And, at age 22, I was on a 5'9" ectomorphic frame. I was 200 pounds.
Wow.
I wasn't skinny fat. I was fat, and I was not in good shape. And I was in the military, and I came home on leave. And one of my best friends from high school, who was a great athlete, always took care of himself, and he was a good influence even back then. He looked at me. He's like, "Aren't you still in the military?" And I was like, "Yeah, man. What do you mean?" He's like, "My God." He's like, "You fat."
Don't they make you run and do push-ups and stuff? Yeah.
They used to, right?
Yeah.
You have to take in. Well, it was the Air Force. Even then, once you get out of the training environment, then it's really on you, right? It's up to you to maintain your fitness. And then they give, we would test, once a year. You would have to, and that's kind of what I wrote about. Like, that was my first kind of inkling, like, man, like, this test used to be so easy, and it wasn't even that hard. And I'm like, I can barely pass this. Like, what's going on? It's like, oh, well, on your days off, you can't drink beer until 3 a.m. While you're working, you can't go to Burger King, twice a day. And by the way, a pack of cigarettes a day probably isn't helping your run times. So I just, a couple of things, I just had a couple of epiphanies in those moments. My friend telling me that was like, you couldn't fight your way out of a wet paper bag. He's like, aren't you supposed to be the one out there defending freedom? And I was like, yeah, you're right. So, my last duty station, I was up in Alaska in the middle of nowhere for a year. There was a guy down the hall from me that was a bodybuilder. And so I just went up to him and I was like, hey, I got to get in shape. What do I do? And he handed me this Muscle and Fitness magazine, like Lou Ferrigno on the cover. And I was just like, all right, if it works for them, it'll work for me. And, that was the beginning of my process and trial and error. And I'll tell another quick story. So while I was there, I worked with these two other men. And at the time, I just thought, these guys are ancient. Like, they're so old. I was 21. They were in their early 30s.
Yeah, it's a
thing. And we
on
worked on the second, right? So when you're young, you think like, my God, 30, you're ancient. And we worked on the second floor. We had a flight of stairs. And both of those guys were heavy smokers. And they came in, and like one of them one day was sitting at his desk, was wheezing for like 5 minutes. And I'm like, hey, are you okay? And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, you're wheezing pretty bad. You're breathing pretty hard. I just want to make sure you're okay. And he thought I was blowing him shit. And I was serious. And he's like, oh, shut up, Flannelly. He's like, just wait. When you get to my point in your, the same point in your career as I am, you'll be in the same condition. And I thought, like, wow, he's right.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, maybe you should quit smoking. And he was like, you smoke? And I was like, yeah, but just because it's something to do. And he was like, right, whatever. And I was like, no, I'm serious. And he was like, why don't you quit? And I was like, okay, I will.
Maybe I will. Yeah.
It was just kind of one of those moments where and so I quit. I didn't smoke for, I just quit. The rest of the year I was there, I never picked up another cigarette. I started going to the gym every day. I quit drinking soda, which we could talk about. That was the first thing I did, because I could crush Mountain Dew and Mellow Yellow, man. Like, that was like a 12-pack a day. I could drink, like, that's how much I was drinking. And that's not uncommon for kids these days, right? Like, they don't even drink water. They drink soda. Yeah. And so there was, again, a couple of those pivotal moments early on. I quit drinking Mountain Dew and just replaced it with water and maybe the occasional Diet Coke, I lost 15 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
You know, that it
Sorry to
is
ramble.
crazy because even in that perception, right? Like every young or younger person hates hearing that, oh, just wait until, right? Like, because I say that kind of stuff now to the guys in their 20s and 30s, right? Like early 30s, because I'm in my late 30s. But then still, there's guys in their 40s, 50s being like, oh, dude, just wait. But then it does create this little chip on my shoulder because I'm like, no, I'm not going to be you. And here's, to myself, like, here's why. But in that story, what I heard was that the guys are seeing you as a younger them, and they're like, well, why wouldn't you become literally me? You're doing exactly the things that I'm doing. But then for you to shake that and make some changes, that's what's uncommon, right? In people, in police, we're a stubborn bunch. We're defensive, and so one of the best ways we can be defensive is to be avoidant. And then I don't want to recognize that my lack of fitness or the unhealthy habits I have are going to potentially make me less optimal, right? Potentially make me less able to be in the fight for life or to save somebody, or you know face heart disease in 10 years. It's scary stuff, and I understand that. But I really appreciate just that, kind of matter of fact, you're like, I just stopped. Like, I just decided, like, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah, and my journey really kind of continued from there, and it was, a lot of it was just maturity. I was a very immature young adult. Like I was in the military. It was, and there's some ways when I look back, I'm a little embarrassed about, some of the opportunities that I squandered. But I'm also thankful for the lessons that I learned and the maturity that I gained, and little things that I picked up along the way. Um, yeah, and I had a very similar. Alcohol was really kind of the same thing. If you're in Alaska, where we were. It was, the months were it was months with no light, very dark, very cold. I mean, we're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 below zero. There were people that spent every day over in the NCO club when they weren't working. They
Mm-hmm.
were in the NCO club, and I was like, I quit drinking as well because the first few months I was there, I was drinking a lot, and I was like, man, this is like, again, kind of like what I recognized in smoking, what I recognized in alcohol, what I recognized in soda, and this is kind of the where these I think inflection points happen because when you replace, and you don't have to do everything at once, and I think that's why sometimes people struggle is they try to make all these changes all at once,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's too overwhelming, and then they fall back on old behaviors. If you just make small changes and then just stick with it for a while, see what works, what doesn't work, you'd be amazed about what you find. And so by the time I left Alaska, I was 25 pounds lighter.
Mm.
I looked literally like a different person. And so when I came back, I actually moved back to my hometown to go to Purdue, and some of my friends from high school were still around, and that was not only did I look like I was in shape, but I also grew like 3.5, 4 inches. So I was a late bloomer in life, and I was, and so you pick up on cues like, oh wow, like, man, you look great. How's it going? What are you up to? And I took some of that confidence that I gained and really brought that with me into the classroom and school. Became more competitive in the classroom, more engaged with schoolwork. Quite frankly, like now I was really heading towards what my ultimate goal was working in law
Yeah.
enforcement.
Yeah. I like that. And because there's so many people that are young or younger cops, or people that are candidates that are, basically looking into law enforcement or prepping, I love your story in a lot of ways. One is that you hit a lot of the prongs, a lot of the things that people will do before they come in, right? One is military. So thank you for your service, by the way. Shout out to my cousin Ty, because he just wrapped up his military career up in Alaska as well with security forces, and law
Nice,
enforcement
nice.
might be in his future as well. So that's pretty cool. But then also you went and got a degree, right? You went to Purdue. So that's another path that some people may take. And also you mentioned, bartending, working in the restaurant industry, right? So again, you even on a side note, you mentioned some opportunities squandered, but I mean, I like to, I get the sense that you're this way too, but it's kind of like nothing's a waste because those moments may have been necessary for you to recognize your other opportunities, and everything that you did or didn't do got you to where you are now. So I like to inject that too, because I think there's a lot of humility that I hear in a story like yours that I think a lot of younger folks could get value from recognizing in themselves. Because I talk to a lot of people that are like, man, I'm really bummed out that I did some dumb things and I need to wait out some timeline things with getting into law enforcement. I'm like, yeah, but think about how much more mature you are because of that, and whether or
Right.
not you become a cop in 1 to 3 years, or whether or not you change your trajectory some other way. Like, if you view it as not a waste, then it won't be.
Absolutely. And that's such a powerful thing that you just, picked up on. But it's hard, right? And my dad used to joke with me a lot. I was very fortunate to have, a father figure like him, very wise. He was a Korean War veteran, grew up in pretty hard times, right? And, he used to joke with me a lot, that youth was wasted on the young.
Yeah, that's the thing.
and and I never really, when you're young, you don't pick up on stuff like that. But the older you get, the wiser and smarter your parents become. Like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I get it. So, you have to approach things with a certain level of understanding that I can plant these seeds, but it may take a while, depending on the person and their circumstances. So just like you're saying, uh, somebody might have to get into a situation or a moment in life where that little kernel, that little nugget, is talking to them in the little spots in the back of their brain, like, oh, this is where I've heard this before. This is where this lesson applies. Which is another recommendation for reading the Stoics.
Hmm.
Um, that's something I picked up the last 10 years. And again, another one of those things I wish I would have picked up younger, but I don't know that I would have been able to do it when I was younger if I would have had the patience.
Yeah.
Again, all things in their due time. But we try to tell ourselves, and I think we see this a lot, and it's not just with younger police officers. Older cops like to say this and project this on younger cops, that there's a lack of work ethic. Everything is given to them. Everything's easier. I definitely, I don't believe that's true. I just think the lessons that we are experiencing are not new. They're not new for any of us. They go back a millennium, right? 2,000 years. You can find these things in writings. The dumb things that humans do to themselves and to others,
Hmm.
and yet we repeat it over and over again. So I think the sooner that you can gain that level of perspective where you're like, okay, I'm in charge of my own destiny. Like, I'm responsible for myself and for my actions. It doesn't matter where I came from. It doesn't matter who my parents are. It doesn't matter what neighborhood I grew up in. All of these things certainly impact me, but in the end, I'm responsible for me. So I've got to find the path that's going to work for me. And certainly having the right resources and the right people along the way to help you and guide you and give you the resources when you need them, the mentoring when you need them, the coaching. Like you said, I love when I hear people talk about coaching, and I appreciate that you're doing that, because it's such an important and vital role in policing today.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's a little bit of a long blab there,
No,
but
I love that. And
oh,
and very much in that vein, you gave the example of when you wanted to take fitness into your own hands. You went to somebody that looked clearly like they knew what they were doing. And it's just a reminder, I hear people from all over different departments that, often a theme is like, well, we don't have a mentorship program. I'm like, well, why don't you find yourself a mentor, right? Like, why don't you engage and pick someone's brain? And it sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, like, I'm looking for a mentor, and see what they say, how they interact. But if not that, then just seek advice, right? Seek feedback, not just the stuff you want to hear, not just when you do well, right? For people that want to get into
absolutely.
investigations, yeah, follow up with the people that get your case and say, hey, what could I do better next time? And if they say like, 9 things that you did amazingly and then a couple things to keep in mind, like that's fantastic. Like actually put that into action. But yeah, very much in this vein, because you and I are just both trying to put out content to be helpful. The extreme majority of people that are listening or reading along with what you or I put out are probably decently into some degree of ownership, right? They're already taking the time.
Right. They're on the path.
Yeah, so it is a little bit preaching to the choir. So I do want to flip into, a conversation that we had prior to recording when we were just connecting and talking about all these fantastic things. But part of that's like wellness in policing, and you brought up the theme earlier about removing barriers and hurdles for officers, for folks. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that was like, as you were a police leader and then obviously came to learn and become so impassioned about wellness and health and fitness?
Yeah, I gave my first wellness presentation I think it was 1999, at my police department. I was retired from Lafayette, Indiana PD. It's a mid-sized agency. We're now, it's grown a lot over the years, but there are 200 total employees, 150 sworn. So, we're not a small agency, but we're not a big agency either. Just enough and we're in a community that keeps us very busy. Mm. It's a very active, high call volume police department.
That's a pretty good euphemism. A community that keeps you busy.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, again, like, not to get sidetracked right away, but when for young people that are looking to go into policing, a lot of them don't do any homework on the agencies that they're going to. They look at the wrong things. They look at, what's the pay like, or where is it located? Well, maybe that's important, but they're not really looking at what is it that I want to get out of my police career? What are the things that interest me? And then what does this police department have that's going to align with my interest? And then going out and doing a ride along, meeting people that work in those, stopping officers that work in those departments and talking to them. That's how you find out where you're going to find the right match and the right fit for you. And I think it's one of the reasons why we see a lot of movement today that we didn't see 20, 30 years ago. Like, it's nothing for people to leave, go to a department, be there for a year or two, and then leave. Yeah. And I think some of that is because they're chasing something. They might not know what they want. But I digress. To go back, really to the original point, when I gave that, the reason I gave that wellness lecture was because I found myself this is a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to make it quick. 2 years on the job. So I was 27 when I started, and the earliest that we could try out for our SWAT team was when you had to have 2 years 2 years of experience on the department, which I think was a great rule. I'd make it more now if I could, but because you don't know what you don't know. You've got to get some working experience under your belt. So our SWAT team required there was a physical fitness test that we had to take as part of the tryout. In most states, in most police departments, the last data that I saw was 98% of police departments in America do not have any mandatory physical fitness standards. Every police academy has one, which is 100% of police academies have a fitness standard. You must pass in order to get this job. If you don't pass, you don't get certified. And so there's kind of one of the first riddles, right? It's like, if we recognize and we have a Supreme Court case protected process that says an agency can implement a job required fitness standard, but most of them don't. So there is a little dichotomy. Why is that there? Well, because once you get out and you start working, you realize, well, it's busy. Now you also have time commitments. A whole lot of excuses start to pile up. And so I was getting ready for my fitness test. I was in shape. I bought this book. I bought a book called, I think it was called The Power Diet or The Runner's Diet. I can't remember, because at the time I was like, who are the fittest people in the world? This is the mid-90s. Marathon runners, triathletes, right? They're the fittest people in the world. So what do they do to train? So based on my experience that I had earlier in life when I started lifting weights and reading, Muscle and Fitness magazine and taking amino acids, eating protein powder, I'm like, well, they must know what to do. So I read this book. It said 60% of your calories should come from carbohydrates, 25% should come from fat, 15% from protein. And so it laid out a plan, and I started following the plan. I was working midnights at the time. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So here's what my day looked like. I would wake up around 5 p.m. I would eat a snack. I'd go to the gym. I was pretty much a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or every other day, chest and tries, back and buys. One day a week I would do legs.
If you got to it, the bro split, right?
But yeah,
Monday is International Chest Day.
And it, and it worked, right? It worked for me. And then I would go to work. And when I would get off work in the morning, I would go for a run. And I was running a lot. So I was trying to improve my running time. So I would run anywhere from 3 to 5, 7 to 10 miles.
Oh, nice.
Just depending on which day it was. And then I would go home. And so based on the recommendations from this book, here's what my breakfast would look like before I go to bed. This is dinner for breakfast. A big bowl of Wheaties with some skim milk, sprinkle some granola on there because, granola is just good for you. It's all natural.
Oh,
yeah. And then I would even slice a banana on there, get some potassium and some, quote, good carbs. And that was my breakfast. And if you looked at what I had read in the macro breakdown, it was perfect. Problem is, after about 2 weeks of doing this, give or take, I started waking up. Like, I would go to bed generally between 9 and 10 a.m. And I started waking up around noon, like clockwork, hungry. Like, oh my God, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
This never used to happen to me. And I'm a disciplined person, so I'm like, no, stick to the plan. I would toss and turn all day. And, after about a week of that, I was getting up and eating snacks because that was the only way I could fall back asleep. And then when I would wake up later, I was waking up tired and I was frustrated with myself because I wasn't following the plan. And I was tired at work. I pretty much had been working nights since I was 18 in the military. I bartended at night. So it wasn't the night shift. It was something was impacting me. And one of these days, there's a Starbucks that had just opened up inside of Barnes & Noble right down the street from where I lived at the time. I wake up at noon. I can't fall back asleep. I'm frustrated. I go down there. I grab a large coffee. And I had this habit of picking up books off the end cap and just kind of reading.
That's what they want
you
to
do. If I find something, if it's interesting, I'll read it. And so this day, I pick up this book. I start reading, and to paraphrase, it was basically like saying, if you're waking up hungry or you're having trouble falling asleep, you really should look at what you're eating and what's going on with your insulin levels and your hormones before going to sleep. And I was like literally the hair on my neck stood up, and I was looking around this is exactly, I am literally standing here reading this book, drinking coffee because I can't fall back asleep, and this has been going on. The book was The Zone Book by Barry Sears. And so I just started reading. I went back, started reading. I sat there for several hours. I skipped my workout that night. I took the book to work with me, dodged as many calls as I could, trying to read. And in the morning, I went to a grocery store about a block from my house and bought a dozen eggs, some cheese, some vegetables. I went home. I made an omelet based on the zone block principles. I won't go into all that.
Sure, yeah.
But it was basically looking at 40% of my calories coming from carbohydrates, 40% from fat, 30% from protein. So big difference. 40, 30, 30, sorry.
Sure, yeah.
40 carbs, 30 protein, 30 fat. And I slept that day like a baby. I mean, I slept through the whole day. I woke up I felt like a new person. It was the best sleep that I'd had in a long time. And I tell this story a lot because, and I'm sorry, I know it's a little bit long and I'm dragging on here, but here's why I think this is important, is that in that moment, I learned several different lessons. And number one was, wow, how much better I actually feel after a good sleep. Like sometimes when you're poorly slept, you don't know how bad you actually feel.
Oh yeah.
And it's amazing the the colors in the world are a little bit brighter after a good day of sleep. Your outlook is a little bit more optimism, a little bit more there's more optimistic. And Matthew Walker, who's written a book called Why We Sleep, probably maybe you've read it, probably the world's leading expert on sleep. He had a quote that I heard recently that's just really ringing with me. He's like, a good night's sleep is like a bridge between despair and hope. And that, I mean, I don't think that quote's ever going to leave me, because that, after that moment, I changed the way that I was eating and why. But here's why I did it, because after reading that book, I never, even the stuff that I picked up in muscle and fitness was all about protein and, eating at the right time to fuel muscle growth.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing in there at the time about, the hormone insulin and what it does, what its role in the body is, where it comes from, like why your pancreas produces insulin, and what happens when you get insulin spikes and insulin drops. And so, to me, taking that step back, it was like, okay, I'm just not being told what to eat, because that's easy. And I think that's why people fail in diets all the time, is because, hey, just do this and you'll get these results. Yeah, if you can stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you understand the why behind what you're doing and what's actually happening, it changes your whole, perspective on why this approach works or does not work. And then you can evaluate it from that perspective. And for me, within 3 months, my push-ups went from being right around 70 in a 2-minute test to around 120.
Both are fantastic, by the way. Yeah, that's legit.
Same with I was in good shape. Yeah. I'm not, that's why I was telling people, like, I was in really good shape. And the same with my sit-ups. My bench press, I went from like 235 to like 275, 285. I never did get to my final goal, which was 2 times body weight bench press, but I came really close, within like 5 pounds.
You just had to lose weight, not add weight to the bar.
Well, but I did. I lost 20 pounds. I was walking around at 175 pounds thinking that was a good weight. I wasn't trying to lose weight. The weight just left. Yeah. It was gone. And I mean, I felt like, so I was the guy who found Jesus, and that's where the preacher part of me came out. Yeah. Like, you got to read this book. I wanted everybody to do it because I felt so good. And the results, I was just like, I was blown away. Yeah. I mean, I didn't change the way I was working out. I changed the way that I was eating, and it impacted me in such a powerful way. I slept great. I felt great. My workouts were great. My recoveries were great. And that just sent me down this path to, okay, if this is having this impact on me, what I could see then around me was what policing does to the human body if you let it.
Yeah. So I want to take a moment, kind of rewind back, and then and add some anecdotes and some takes. Is that, you talked about the zone diet, and there are so many things that are built around that currently now, right? Like, that was some time ago, and then it built a lot of traction. And at that macro split is a pretty moderate, like, it's nothing extreme, right? Like, if you think about keto, that's extreme. If you think about fruitarian on the other side, that's extreme, right? It's like almost all carbs. Can some people thrive on it? Sure. For a while, maybe, right? But should most people stick to a more moderate approach just based on food? Like, right, you talked about how you just went and got some veggies, some eggs, some cheese, and some people are like, hearing cheese, what? And but it's like, okay, it's still food, right? And you look at the ingredients, look at your own body, like, know how you handle dairy, right? All these things. And what I want to kind of circle back to is, like, it's so individual, but you're talking about hormones and insulin, and then it makes me think about cortisol, and that's super critical, right? You're a fit dude, that in really good shape, super active, and you really needed, sounds like, a lot more protein, right? And then you're just creating these, sugar spikes and dips that was waking you up. I had similar anecdote that I've shared before, in that I was trying keto as an active dude that's not, my genetics would probably not inspire most people to do or try keto. You know, like there's no East Asian population that subsisted on almost no carbs. It's actually quite contrary, right? Like rice is a
Right.
thing, starches, fruit are a thing. So all to say that, you know, when I was going hard and lifting heavy, lifting frequently, doing sprints, and then trying keto, and very much kind of like your story, like, no, I can do this. Mind over matter. And some people say, you know, embrace the discomfort. Your body is adapting. Sure, I went into ketosis, but was it helpful towards my goals? No, it wasn't. In the end, I lost muscle mass. My sleep went to garbage. My hormones were totally out of whack. Not to say people shouldn't or can't do keto, but for me, it wasn't right with my genetics, working nights, working this high stress job, and the active and high intensity exercise that I was doing and I enjoyed. So all to say, like, we sometimes we have to actually recognize what are our goals, what are we trying to do, and then I even like the little anecdote where you're like, hey, you might not realize how you may be able to feel or how you could feel in the morning. I mean, how powerful that is that, and some people might be rolling their eyes or truly in shock when they hear this, but there are some mornings I wake up where I choose to drink coffee, and I'm like, I don't need one, but it sounds really good. I'm going to have a little cup. Versus
Yeah.
like you need it to survive, right? It's a requisite, and so different. So no, I really appreciate you kind of going down with the specifics of what helped you and how people may be able to reflect on what their practices are. Why are they doing what they're doing? Just like an agency, like, are we just doing it just because that's how we've always done it? And should we question this? Should we throw it under the microscope and revamp it a little bit?
Yeah. Right. The old saying, the two things cops hate most, right? The way things are and change.
Yeah,
We've all heard that, joke. It's funny, right? The first time you hear it, it's really funny. And the reason it's funny, because it's
it's
true.
true. Yeah.
And we resist change. We all have our own opinions about what we think we should be doing. And we all feel strongly about that because we all have our own experiences and our own perspective, our own minds. And so, we want to embrace that, right? That diversity that we bring to the workforce. But at the same time, especially like I like to use this analogy when it comes to nutrition and diet and fitness, because what you just said, I wish we could bottle that up and get everybody to hear that and then repeat it over and over again. Like, I tried this, it didn't work for me. So what tends to happen in the police world, right? Whether it's a new policy, a new program, a new initiative, if somebody doesn't want to do it right from the start, if they don't have an open mind, they're going to be resistant to trying it in the first place.
Yeah.
And they're going to be looking for every point of failure to point out, look, this doesn't work. And when we're looking for something to do, oftentimes when it comes to diet and nutrition, we're looking for uh, the easy button in a sense, right? I just want somebody to tell me what to do
Hmm.
and make it easy for me. I'm a slightly or fairly or very disciplined person, whatever category you fit into. I just want someone to tell me what to do. The problem is uh, that, and this is again, this is experience that I learned from, is me trying to force a program or a protocol on others that might not be the right fit for them was not a good approach. Um, if I could take my older self and go back to my younger self, I would be more specific and intentional about telling the story the way I just did. Right? Here's what I was experiencing. Here's what I did, and here's how it worked for me.
Hmm.
Um, what I would tell you, and from everything I've learned, is if you would have come to me, and I would have, one of the things that I would ask you, one of the first things, if you were coming, like I did this with a lot of CrossFit athletes that I coach. I owned my wife and I owned and operated a CrossFit gym for years. And, again, it was one of those things where here we have this great methodology. We can bring people in the door and I can crush you physically in the gym. But if you don't come back for 2 weeks, what did we accomplish?
Right.
Nothing. And it's easy to exercise somebody really hard.
Yeah.
It's more challenging to do it in a way that's going to work for them and be
But it's
beneficial.
not sexy. And sorry to interrupt, but like that is how some people that aren't active and haven't been around fitness culture in a healthy way, that's how they evaluate effectiveness, right? They're like, oh, I went to the, the big box gym. I got my first session, and man, I could barely walk for 4 days. And
Yep.
as a professional, you are like, man, like think about all those days you weren't able to train. But to the lay person, they're like, man, I got crushed, I got smoked. And I think that there is that
Yeah.
same thing, because if you say, hey, let's try the zone diet, ease into it, why don't you actually plug in calories, but don't cut anything, right? Just like plug it in. But that sounds like you're not making any progress, right? So we want to do something extreme. We want to do something where the fat appears to melt off, even though it's just water weight, or you know
Yeah.
fill in the blank. Slow and steady and sustainable is not sexy. It doesn't sell. It doesn't pop into a magazine headline, right?
Yeah. And so for someone like you, um, what if you would have come to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to try the keto diet." I did the keto diet and I did it for a while. I'm very fortunate to have, sadly we lost her, but my backyard neighbor, her name was Sarah Hallberg. If you look her up if you just do Sarah Hallberg on YouTube, you'll find a TED talk that she did. It's one of the, it's been viewed, I think, over 20 million times.
Mm.
But she ran the largest clinical study in the United States that's ever been done to show that a high fat, low carbohydrate diet, you can reverse type 2 diabetes, and you can reverse insulin resistance. 60% reversal rates, remission rates is what they like to call it now. 20% significant reduction in medications, about a 10 to 12%, I hate to call it a failure rate, but, what Sarah used to tell me was it was generally non-compliance, like people not following the diet. But, the caveat is like that, a well-crafted, well-designed ketogenic diet can be incredibly effective for the right people. So if you are insulin resistant, type 2 diabetic, this can be a very effective way for you to lose weight and to do it in a safe manner, certainly under the guidance of a physician or a nutritionist that's trained in this, especially if you're taking medication. The last thing you want to do is make a drastic change to your diet. But sadly, now, everyone's looking for the GLP-1 inhibitors and, the Ozempics to try to, find the easy button. But the reason I say this, like if you came to me and said, "Hey, this is what I'm going to do," I would again start with, "Okay, well, why?
Why?
What are your goals?
Mm-hmm.
Are you changing? Are you going to start running endurance events? Are you going to try to run marathons?" Because I would tell you, you might want to be careful about how you engage in this process. And that's the mistake that I made is like, I found out through this process, I'm what they call a lean mass hyperresponder. Probably in about 5% of the population that does not respond well to a ketogenic diet from a lipid perspective. So lipids, why do they matter? Most people, when they go to get their annual physical, and this is a question I like to ask too for police departments. Maybe in your PD, are you required to get an annual physical?
No, it's incentivized through like a city wellness program, but no, it's not required, sadly.
So when you got hired, though, you had to pass a physical.
Oh yeah,
and a psychological exam, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
You get the physical.
and
You have the physical fitness test, which is now incentivized also through some form. But yeah, I mean, there was like the breath test and all that, right? Pretty expansive, which you want.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're going through that occupational care test, right? And the federal government has laid out certain specific guidelines on what's required of a police officer in the United States. So that's why they do those tests, which is kind of funny. Like we know that things change, so why don't we have? And some agencies do, right? It all depends on where you are, and it all depends on leadership decisions that are made. Same thing could be said for psychological evaluations. At the end and these are becoming more popular, and I think recognized as probably a really good practice. Every year, you have to come back with a note from your doctor that says you've had a physical exam, that you're fit for duty physically, and then a slip from the department psychiatrist or psychologist or whoever you contract with from your city, your EAP program, that, hey, I've met with our practitioner and I'm also fit for duty emotionally and spiritually. And it's a great check-in point. In fitness test, here's, and maybe this was a long way to come back around, but maybe we can tie it all together through this. So my agency, the chief that was before me was a great mentor of mine, tremendous amount of respect for him. He not only was, he started his career at LA County Sheriff's before he moved back to the Midwest. He was also in the military. He was a commissioned officer in the military. So he retired as a chief of police, but also as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. But he was very leadership oriented, very process oriented, and he recognized that we had gone away from annual physical exams. The department used to have a physician that was contracted through the city every year in the 1980s and even into the early 90s that was required. But somewhere along the line, new leadership came in. That process dropped by the wayside. There's probably a good reason why it did, but it just, for whatever the reason, it wasn't there anymore. So one of the first recommendations from a fitness and a wellness perspective in my path in studying wellness and reading about, Brian Vila's work, John Violante's work, and studying the data on cops, like, wow, cops die really young and we die really early and we're dying of cardiovascular events at a rate 18 times higher than the general population. Wow, that's kind of scary. Knowing that, like, what I was experiencing when I was sleeping poorly, thinking I was eating right, but I wasn't for my level of activity and what I was doing. That's what sent me down the path. So I wrote up a proposal. I spent the time. I did the work and said, here's some sample policies why I think we should get annual physical fit for duty evaluation. So he liked it, implemented it, and not surprisingly, there was a lot of guys that were pissed at me for presenting that.
Yeah, was there a union contention point
Indiana's a right to work state, so we don't have strong union representation. We do the FOP generally is our bargaining agent, but in the end you get what you get. That's about as simple as I can put it, which I think thankfully those things are changing a little bit, because I'm not anti-union by any stretch. The unions, I think, can do wonderful things as long as they partner with people and everybody has the right intentions.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was first change, and the number of people that complained about just having to go, oh well, this is going to be an out-of-pocket expense. That was the first thing. This is going to cost me money, so we got it worked out with the insurance. No, it's covered by insurance. It's an annual preventative checkup. There's no cost to you. So yeah, that was step number one. And just that in that alone, I got stories back. He never did tell me who it was, but he said, hey, you know what? As a result of this, we've had a couple guys have come in that had undiagnosed high blood pressure. One guy had some pretty significant heart issues.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I was thinking. I was like, man, somebody probably had a life-saving or life-changing, recognition, right, from having to face the music, and hopefully, got a lot better from getting that information, whereas they would have otherwise ignored it.
So everybody knew that I owned a CrossFit gym and that I was a CrossFit trainer when I was appointed to the chief's office in 2012. So there was a lot of anxious people that were worried, like, I'm going to make everybody do CrossFit.
Yeah, burpees daily.
Yeah. Hey, part of me would have loved to have done it, but the wiser side of me that recognized that, my intention when I started to make some changes, when I talk about removing barriers, was what I wanted to do was raise individual level of awareness. what I wanted people to recognize was, yes, you're going to keep going and getting your annual fit for duty evaluations. But the first thing I did was twice a year in our training days. So we had gone to 12-hour shifts, and we have everyone in the department trains once a month, a minimum of 4 hours, where you get to train as your whole shift on. It's similar to what a Kelly day is in fire departments, but we have a training day. So I said twice a year, there's going to be no job qualifying penalty, but everybody is going to do the academy exit standards. We're going to spend an hour of our 4-hour training session and run everyone through that test. That did not go over well either. There were especially a lot of veteran officers that were like, dude, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
You know,
How much lead time did they have? Because I want to focus a little bit on like the culture change and like, were they prepped for it? Did they have like, did we socialize it? Things like that.
Yeah, so I took over in the fall of 2012, and so what I told them was in the spring, we're going to do it. We're going to do it for the first time. So everybody had 6 months notice that we were going to do it. So here's what happened the first time is like, the SWAT guys and the other guys that, that are somewhat competitive, and, you have a wide variety of mix on every department. They went out and they crushed it. They gave it a great effort. I had a couple of veteran officers, a couple of them walking, like when we did the 400 or the mile run, we went to a local high school track. A couple of those guys were walking around the track smoking cigarettes. And I went to every one, and I ran, and I did so I was doing 2-a-days because we had four sessions. So I went to every one of those sessions and did it myself. I'm not going to ask you to do something I'm not willing to do, and sure. I'm going to make you see me out here doing it with you. And I think those guys, they kind of gave me the smirk and like, I got you, walking around like smoking the cigarette, like you can't make me do this. And so, with everybody, when they were done, when they crossed the finish line, the whole group, I just said, thank you. Appreciate you coming out here. Appreciate the effort. Hopefully what you've learned is, you're either in better shape you were when you left the academy or the same, or you've got areas where you're in decline. And so now over the next couple of days, how do you, assess how you feel? Are you really sore? Was this really challenging for you, or was it really easy for you? And that, that can help you determine how to set a path forward. And if anybody wants advice or if they want help, let us know. And we'll start, given the resources that you need. And so we did that for a couple years. I had one guy who was eating a Snickers bar when he was going around the track.
Was that an overt sign of protest, or was that just do you think that was
no, he didn't need the carbs. He wasn't fueling up.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was that after we did that for a couple years, the younger officers started to embrace it. The understanding is look, I don't care. I'm not looking to make everybody a CrossFit athlete. What I'm looking to do is help you understand where you are in your level of fitness, because your level of fitness is impacting your wellness. Fitness and wellness in health are they're interconnected. They're interrelated. They're not necessarily the same thing, because you can be very fit and very unhealthy. But if you're fit, generally you're going to be more healthy. And if you're very unfit, I wanted them to think about this in terms of how is it impacting me personally? How is it impacting my ability to do the job? And in turn, how does that impact my partners? Because in policing, that's kind of one of those unwritten contracts that we have, is that I got your back and you got mine. And I've got another story about that I tell a lot, but that's the lesson. And that's where the self-reflection needs to happen. And that's where I was really hoping that people would sit back and say, you know what, the chief may be a dick, and he, I may not like him. I may think he's too aggressive. He's asking me to do too much. This is not fair. I shouldn't have to do this. For whatever these reasons, generally what we all know is when we recognize that we have a deficiency, and we also see what the path is to remove that, what the barriers are and the work that it's going to take. The first thing that we generally encounter, that first emotion, is fear. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, this is going to be hard. Like, how do I let myself go? But with that, we also have the opportunity to press through. And so that was really kind of step one.
Yeah. Oh, that's huge. That's huge, Chief. I feel like we need a part two. We're coming kind of on that sweet spot of time, and maybe we'll just put a break in here. And I don't know if you have more time to keep recording today or
I'm
a
good.
different
Yeah.
day.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I have another 30 minutes.
All right. Well, I will just put a pin in it right now, and if I leave it recording this way, it's just going to be, hey, stay tuned for part two.
Yeah, and I can be a little bit briefer in terms. It just, I think it's important for people to kind of understand the background and, where you come from and where you're going and the why behind it. So I can eventually settle on what I did with the labs and where we are now. And I think ultimately what we're trying to do is save lives. And I know that I've been saving lives, and that's my passion moving forward. That's why I write the journal. That's why I'm doing the blog. I'm, like you, right? There, not everybody is a Jocko and a Sean Ryan where you're going to go out and make $1 million doing a podcast. I don't think I've made a penny from this thing.
No, I'm just
trying to produce.
Yeah, I'm just spending money. Yeah.
I'm trying to produce content and just drop awareness out there that I'm hoping that, we can just kind of sprinkle this and hopefully some of it will take root. And if we can change one life, then it's worth it.
And that's the thing, is for sure, like, love Jocko, what he's done. I don't know how many hours I tuned in, and just I've gained so much from it, and certainly thousands, maybe millions, I don't even know, right, have as well. But your message, your experience, and your background is going to resonate with someone different and better, arguably, than Jocko's. And similarly for me, like, we come from very different backgrounds, but we have this common law enforcement bond, and this experience and this passion for wellness, and this experience and passion for leadership. And so, it is not. It's not all the same, and intentionally so. One thing I do want to ask you about too is, like, as you grew, wellness, and you spent 10 years as a chief. I kind of want to just ask you, like, what was it like being chief?
It was not something that I planned, and that sounds kind of weird. I know there's a lot of people someday I want to be the chief of police, and I had a mentor earlier in my career too, as a sergeant, that had a very strong influence on me, and he said something really powerful one night. We were just having a car-to-car conversation, on midnight, solving all the world's problems,
Mm-hmm.
Solving everything that's wrong with the department.
Of course.
He just said, look, he's like, if you ever become chief, he's like, what you got to remember is, like, there's always going to come a day where you have to know where your line is and which line you're going to cross and which you're not going to cross, and understand that, there may come a day where you have to just step away and go back to being whatever merited rank that you were before you went to chief. And you also have to understand that someday that decision may be made for you, and you don't have a choice.
Sure.
So he's like, he wasn't necessarily interested in that, but it was something that he had clearly given it a lot of thought. I think he would have made a great chief, by the way. I won't say his name just because I didn't ask him, but he would have really made a great chief. He went on to get his PhD, and now he teaches. He teaches, in college, and prepares young people to enter the profession. I think fantastic job.
Very cool.
So I guess, what's it like to be chief? And again, I joke, it is really like one decision away from being a lieutenant again, because I was a lieutenant when I got appointed to the chief's office, and that decision might not even be yours. It might be made because of a decision that one of your officers made at some point in in the line of duty or off duty or whatever, create an incident, create controversy, and guess what? Change in leadership is required,
Right.
or this is what a mayor is going to do. You're gone. And so that's the system that I worked in. So you understand that right off the bat. And the cool thing about being a chief was you really do have an opportunity to influence the change of direction or the future of your department. I was lucky because my predecessor really, I thought, had us on a great path. I mean, it was a great police department, and the chief prior to him I thought was a great chief as well. So I don't necessarily know that like we had a dysfunctional agency, but we I think the opportunities that I saw for improvement were there. Like why don't we have a physical fitness standard? Why aren't we pursuing individual optimization? Why aren't we pressing our officers to be the best that they can be? Because that's quite frankly how you provide best service to your community. So, and I was always a tech guy as well. I love technology. I love innovation. And that it was that curiosity, that curious mind side of me, that continuous learner side of me that I was one of those guys as a young officer that always questioned why we do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example. I was a crime scene photographer early in my career. We used in 1995 through like 1998, 1999. If you went on a just like a routine call for service that required some pictures to be taken, like a domestic battery, a criminal mischief, something like that, and you needed a photograph, well, you got a Polaroid camera, and you literally brought a Polaroid out, and you would get in trouble if you took too many.
They're expensive, yeah.
Hell yes, and they were expensive back then. But if you had a major, like a felony, then that required calling out a crime scene photographer. And so, whether it be a robbery, a homicide, something like that, we didn't have evidence techs at the time. You had detectives that collected evidence, but you had crime scene photographers that would come, and the crime scene photographer was probably more of the first evolution of what we see as evidence techs now. We would break out the 35 millimeter camera, which means you had to have a trained photographer to do that. So I was doing that for a while, and I was a hobbyist with photography, and digital cameras started to come out. So I was like, wow, what a cheap and effective way to take these photos. We could get rid of the crime scene or the Polaroids at crime scenes and actually have decent photos. What do you think I was told when I said, hey, we should go to digital cameras?
Some version of no.
Yes.
Too expensive. Like, we got to buy all these cameras
because right. So these, when you're not an administrator, you don't think from an administrative perspective. You think from a patrol officer's perspective, and just give me the tools to get the job done. And if there's a better way to do it, then let's do it. Like, so for me, it didn't make any sense. Why would you say no? And then I had older crime scene photography. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, why not? Well, because digital pictures are too easy to manipulate. They'll never be accepted in the courts. And I was like, you can manipulate a 35 millimeter image. Why? I've been to the crime scene photography school, right? You still have to get on the stand and testify that what I took a picture of is a true and actual representation of what I saw, and that yes, the image there matches what I saw, and no, I have not manipulated this image in any way, or am I aware of anyone else doing the same? So, long story short, I did research on different cameras at the time. The department wound up buying a couple of these cameras. We created a storage system on the 3x5, 3.5-inch disc.
Yeah, floppy disks.
So, yeah.
There are going to be listeners that don't know what a floppy disk is. They may be inclined to plug it into their phone right now and be like, what is a floppy disk?
Yeah, look up a floppy. And so you could call to have a shift commander or somebody else pick up the camera for you, come out, and those things were so easy to use. Anybody could take the picture. The great thing was, too, unlike a Polaroid, you take the Polaroid, and let's say it's a domestic violence victim, and you've got to sit there for 5 minutes waiting for the damn thing to uh, mature, so you can look to see, did I get a good image capture or not, and develop, I guess is the word. It was stuck in my mind. I can take a digital image and look right on the screen right there and tell right away, oh yeah, and matter of fact, it was far better.
Yeah.
So we just set up a system just like we would for anything else, like chain of custody for the disc. I took the pictures, and so I did a lot of work on the back end with that. So that, again, very early on, I just like I did with the wellness stuff, and I saw what the data was in terms of why police officers are dying young. I experienced a change, and so I put together a program and asked to teach it. Go ahead. Digital photography was the same thing. I saw a better way to do it. I did the work. I did the homework. I did, here's all the costs. I did all the calculations. I put the policy together, and that's what it took. And guess what? It didn't take the first time. Like, it took a few times to get these things done. So that's one of my lessons too, is like, just because you see something that there may be a better way, the timing might not be right. Or your research might not be thorough enough, and so you might have more work to do. So don't be afraid don't be afraid to do the work to put together the plan, to have someone to tell you no, because there will be another opportunity for them to say yes, or for someone else to say yes. Take the feedback, and okay, why not? Why not now? All right, well, these are the reasons why I'm being given. And there's a lessons for leadership in there too. When you tell somebody no, especially someone that's done the time, put in the effort, you better take the time to really respect the work that they put into it. Because if you don't, guess what's going to happen?
Yeah.
They're not going to do it.
You're going to shut them down. And, I love that. I mean, to go back to Jocko, right? Like, extreme ownership is like recognizing, hey, if you have an idea that didn't go up, like, maybe that's you. Maybe you didn't flesh it out well enough, right? And you can ask those questions. And yeah, absolutely, to the leadership, just dismissing somebody is simply doing that. Like, you're going to shut them down, and every leader of every type, informal, formal, will recognize that they love when someone brings a solution, and what they love more oftentimes, because it's rare, is someone bringing some homework, right? Some actual data that will make it, rather than bringing someone work, right? Hey, here's my cool idea, the good idea fairy, with nothing on paper, nothing vetted, nothing researched, and like, cool, like, why don't you come back with some things, on paper, look into this. And a lot of people don't, right? But yeah, when someone puts in the work, what a missed opportunity, and potentially like a very trajectory changing thing if you don't give that person some mentorship, some coaching, some guidance.
Right. And I think that's, I'll go back to the fitness side of things, and I'll let you answer this question. I'm not saying everybody needs to be a world-class athlete to be a good cop, but if you look at the work that they put in to at least maintain a standard that's going to make them an effective cop, so they can get the mission accomplished, so they can do what they need to do, save their own life, the life of a community member, or, most importantly, one of their partners. Well, if you take that same person and they say, why are we carrying SIGs? We should be carrying Glocks. Right? Because we went through that too, like, transition of weapon systems a couple times. We need to carry Glocks. Why not SIGs? Because Glocks are better. Why? Because I like Glocks better. So Glocks are better. So-and-so carries a Glock. So therefore Glocks are better. And that, maybe that's a very, superficial analogy, but the process is really the same. I mean, if you really want the Glock over the SIG, and you're the person that's involved, or you're part of this team and this transition team that's doing it, then first and foremost, when you start the process, you better start it with an open mind and with a recognition that, well, maybe the SIG is better than the Glock. Because if you start with the end in mind, and you're going to start eliminating things that don't fit your own narrative, and that's a bad mindset for a cop, right? For a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
you see the downfalls of that in investigation where you're assumptive, right? Whereas to go
yes,
all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, like be curious, right? Like you can have a hypothesis and then be open to disproving your own hypothesis, right? And maybe it's not the SIG or the Glock. In your research, you find out that the MMP is the bee's knees, right?
absolutely. And you know what? And what it'll come down to is you'll when you are making your decision based on what your goals are, like which one of these is going to help us get to our goal. And you might find two or three that actually meet the requirements that will get you to the goal. So then you might make a financial decision.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. We can go with company A, get the same thing that we were looking for. It's not company B, but it's going to be $100,000 cheaper.
Yep.
Well, if you can't make it a strong argument to me, well, why is that going to be better than as a chief? That's ultimately where my decision would go.
Sure.
And show me what the options are. Show me the work that you put into it. What are we going to get in return for this? What's the ROI expected out of it? What's the need? Right? Is this a want or a need? Because that helps you prioritize things. So this is, I know we got talking really about wellness, but I'll come back to that really quick, because when you look at those types of people on an agency, and this is again why coaching I think is so important, and why it's a tool that has been completely underutilized in policing, and it's a fairly new concept that's being introduced to policing, but not new to the corporate world.
No.
And to where
every other world,
where we have expectations, and you either meet them or you don't. And if you don't meet the expectations, you're gone. And if I'm investing in you, and I know that you have potential, then I'm going to invest in these resources to help you reach that potential, because that's good for the organization and it's good for you. And in policing, we don't think that way, and we haven't traditionally thought that way. You get hired, you get on the job. If you look at, and I know this is again a broad generalization, but if you look at the people who eventually become detectives, then eventually become frontline supervisors, your FTOs, your trainers, your specialty unit members, and then eventually your upper administrative leaders, those are generally the people, probably by a very wide margin, that are putting in the work.
Mm-hmm.
And they have that curious mind. They're doing the right things. And I do recognize that, some people are just good test takers. Some people are just in the right place at the right time. And some people, there is a certain amount of nepotism that still exists in policing. And,
mm-hmm.
and sadly, where it's the most destructive is when new police chiefs are selected. I think we do a terrible job selecting new police chiefs in America, and that's one of the biggest problems in policing. And I say that as a chief.
Yeah, no, it's like rather than a lot of internal processes, it is largely external from my understanding, right? It's a lot of the city or I suppose the area government entities selecting, rather than any input from the people that they're going to lead.
Yes. Yeah, you're really getting chosen based on your political affiliations and your alignment, rather than on your professional resume. It doesn't necessarily, it is largely a political job, depending on the size of the agency and where you are. That's a question I got a lot. What do you think about the politics of it all? I've always been a very social person, so it's never being, doing media interviews, stuff like that never bothered me. A lot of cops hate to be on camera.
Yeah.
Stuff like that has never really bothered me. But I was in a pretty unique situation where my mayor was a former SWAT commander of mine and a former captain on our police department.
No kidding.
So, Yeah, when you go into interview, and those interviews, it was a very grueling process. I mean, I think I spent almost 6 hours in my interview with him. You're not pulling the wool over his eyes, right?
Yeah.
He ran IA for a long
Yeah,
time.
no,
You know,
you want to make sure it's right, even as the candidate, right? Like the last thing you want is for something to not be on the table and you're like, I do not know what I walked into. Like I think for both parties, right?
right. And I think there's a lot of people. Listen, like the group of people that I went up with. I mean, there were several of them. I would have been glad to work for any of them, and I thought that they would have made great chiefs as well. But I know it's not like that at every agency, and why chiefs get selected, I think sometimes is it does more damage than it does good. We've come a long way. I think things are getting better from a professionalism perspective. But back to the coaching comment and the mentoring, that whole, I mean, coaching really is that intentional design to improve the performance of individuals, not just in their job knowledge and their ability to do the job, but as people. Improve them as holistic, well-rounded people, because that's how we get people that are mentally stable, emotionally secure, spiritually in a good place, physically fit, financially set. That's how you reduce stressors. That's how you get people to bring their best self to work every day. And in the end goal, which is provide the best service to your community, which I think oftentimes gets lost on a lot of officers, is that they think the organization is there to support them. It should support them, but you, as part of the organization, are there to provide a service to your community, and that's to keep them safe,
Yeah.
and to do it in a constitutionally equitable way. And I think we sometimes we lose a little bit of sight of that as well. And that's a bit of a broad subject, and we could probably go down a lot of rabbit holes
For
there.
sure, for sure. One thing I do want to also ask you about, and this might be the last kind of topic I'm going to pick your brain on, but I think that there's a relevant, necessary, increasing conversation about leaving into the next chapter of life, right? Like hanging up the uniform. You're now retired after 10 years, which is a very healthy stint as a chief. Um, Clearly, you have irons in different fires, but if you want to share for the listeners some of the things that you do, I know a few of them. But then, what has helped you in that navigation process? Because as you've said, and as it's obvious, you're so passionate and impactful with the profession. You're still very much intertwined with influencing the profession in a positive way. What are some things that have helped you in that, and how do you stay busy now in your chapter?
Yeah. Oh man, a lot of things there. Number one, I never really had intended to be the chief. It wasn't something that I sought out. But when the opportunity at the right time did present itself, I had to make a choice. Like here, I saw things that I thought I could bring to the organization that would benefit it and that would help move it into the future. And if I didn't at least put my hat in the ring and try to take the opportunity, then I knew somebody else would. And that means, even though I might support that person, it means that I have to put my ideas and the goals that I have, I have to make them secondary to theirs, because one of the one of the foremost requirements for being a good leader is being a good follower first.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I could talk for hours about that, and you have to want to accomplish the mission for the organization. So that's why I took the shot. I was like, okay, I mean, here are the things that I see. This is where I see policing going. This is where I see our organization. This is where I see where we can improve on what we've already built. And so that's why I did it. Now, when I did that, I knew like the average tenure for a police chief in the U.S. is 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, that's what I
For
thought.
larger agencies, it can be 4 to 5 years. But again, that goes back to because chiefs are politically appointees for the most part, and that means your job security is runs it runs lockstep with your mayor's job security. which again, when you start thinking about that, that can be somewhat
Mm-hmm.
problematic. If you have a chief, that goes back to what the advice my friend said. You have to always know what that line is you're never going to cross. Um, you know, I was fortunate that I had, a mayor with very high integrity and high standards. I wasn't ever put in that type of position, but I know friends that were, like people that I have worked with that had to make those kind of decisions. But my goal was I wanted to uh, prioritize a few things. One, the number one priority that I had was I wanted to change the culture around wellness and fitness. Um, and and the reason behind that was because I felt like if we can optimize the individuals, that's the key to optimizing the organization. Because the most important piece of equipment that any police officer brings to work every day is the 6 inches between their ears. It doesn't matter what kind of gun you're carrying. It doesn't matter what brand your body camera is. It doesn't matter what CAD and RMS system you have. If you have a tired, disgruntled, shitty cop coming to work, then he's dragging everybody else down around him.
Yeah.
And so it was really about, creating, some pretty specific goals and then starting towards them and setting the path and then really just saying, hey, here's setting the expectations for what needs to get done. And then, clearly communicating what those expectations were. And, the number one complaint that you always get as an administrator is about communication, poor communication, lack of communication. And, there were things in hindsight that I think I did well. There are other things I would definitely go back and change. But in sticking with the question, I figured I would have 4 to 6 years. And I looked at what age I was. I looked at what the age of retirement was in the state of Indiana, what the pension was, and I kind of set a clock backwards. And my goal was initially, I was hoping to get 6 years. That was what I was banking on. Um, about 6 months into the job, I called up my predecessor, asked him to go to lunch. We sat down, and one of because I'd read the book the first 90 days. I had kind of had mapped out a plan. I had a lot of things in mind about what I was going to do, and of course, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Yeah.
So I got punched in the face, which would be a couple other episodes that we would have to go into there. But I called my predecessor. We went and sat down for lunch, and the first question I asked, the first thing I said to him was, "Hey, I'm sorry." And he was like, "What do you mean you're sorry?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I thought I understood, but I didn't. Now I know what it's like to be the chief, where before I only thought I knew, but now I do know. So I want to say I'm sorry. If I could go back and do a few things, I thought I was a good follower, and I think in many cases that I was, but in some cases I wasn't. Uh, primarily being that sometimes I felt like my job was to, uh, relay a message in a way that is that would be relatable and not instead of just relaying the message. But again, another long story.
Yeah. No, I
So
that can resonate with me. Or some of my reflections are that I'm learning that it's less about packaging in a way that I would receive it as an officer, as a sergeant, right? Because not everyone is me, clearly, right? Like everyone's so different, right? And so trying to meet people
right.
halfway where they are.
Yeah, and based on that conversation, I asked him too. I was like, "Hey, now that you've been gone for 6 months and you've had a little chance to decompress, um, he had two master's degrees. He was going, he continued continuous education through his whole time when he was chief. He went on to work in a graduate school, and so again, I just asked him like, what would you do differently? And so he laid out a few things and he's like, that's a great question. Here are some of the things that I think you should think about. And one of those things was, what is your exit strategy going to be? And when is that? And when is that going to take place? So, for me, I told myself six. The most I wanted to do was eight, because eight was going to put me right around 52, 53 years of age. I would be vested in our pension. I can draw at 52, and that would still allow me another 10 to 15 years to go pursue a second career or whatever I wanted to do beyond policing. At the time, I didn't necessarily know what it would be, but it was certainly my passions at the time were already wellness, performance optimization, how to manage that, how to track that, how to improve it, how to build on it. So when we got to the 8-year mark, I was in the middle of a building project, building a new public safety center. It was basically what started out around a $75 million project, and I think we got the project done for $52 million, but building a new police department. So I didn't want to leave in the middle of that, and then COVID hit, and then a lot of it too was also what my wife was up to at the time. My wife works for an insurance company; she's a manager. So coming back, I guess, to try to simplify it down is, again, begin with the end in mind. Think about what you want to do when you're done. Make sure, this is why the financial resources are so important for police officers. Start from day one with your plan for how you're going to plan for your exit. Make sure you're going to people who know what they're doing, who know how to manage money, that are culturally competent, that they understand police officers, what police officers' lives are like, some of the pitfalls that can occur in their careers. Get that good planning early on, and then know what you're going to do next and build towards that. And again, that's where learning takes place, where you have to position yourself throughout your career. Pursue passions, things that you're interested in. You don't leave if you don't have the insurance and you don't have the things in place that are going to be able to help support you. Continue to work on those. Don't leave before you're ready. Don't leave before you're sure it's time to go. And I'll tell people, you'll know when it's time. Don't start telling yourself at 10 years, I can't, and here maybe here's a piece of advice too, from the coaching perspective. If you're out there right now and you begged and begged and begged to get this job, practically, you would have done anything to get the opportunity to become a cop. And those first 3, 5, 7 years, you just absolutely loved the job. And now suddenly you're at 10 years and you're telling yourself, I'm trapped. I can't wait till I get to 20 years. The problem isn't the job. And the problem is not your police department. It's not your chief. It's not your sergeant or lieutenant. It's you. And I say that with a certain amount of candidness, in that you may have a shitty sergeant, you may have a shitty department, you may be in a bad situation, but you have control over how you're going to respond to that. And so for people that find themselves having those thoughts, what I would recommend and strongly encourage is to take a big step back, take advantage of your EAP program, take advantage of if you have a coaching program available to you, if you have a formal mentoring program, take advantage of that, but take a deep, some deep reflection and think about what is your goal? What are the things that you want to accomplish? What are some of the things that you might be doing to self-sabotage yourself? And, it gets easy to start pointing the fingers elsewhere to have people solve the problem, but it's generally inward where you're going to find solutions. And don't wait until things, till you're in that position where you're unhappy or you're struggling. Work on those things right from Jump Street. And I'll close that by saying this is again why I am so passionate about fitness and wellness overall, because overall, if you're well, all of those other things, you're not walking so far uphill all the time. Like, you see a mountain, and that's kind of the career trajectory, right? Is wherever your destination is, if you're always walking uphill and someone's always putting a pound in your pack, you're putting a pound a month in your pack, which could be on your waistline or whatever else, everything just gets harder. And so the one thing that you can do to improve everything else is to take care of your health, spend the time, invest, and understand why you're gaining weight, what might be going on and do the work to try to maintain a decent level of, you don't have to be super fit, super cop, but try to maintain a decent level of wellness and fitness, because that's going to make everything else easier.
Yeah, that's a huge statement you made, right? And it can be really uncomfortable for people, but that is so much a part of stoicism, right? That you talked about earlier, is we have to recognize that in what we reflect in ourselves, how we process ourselves, what we put out, that can very much affect our environment. Like what we bring to the environment influences the environment, right? So I think that's such a powerful, huge summary of so many things that we've talked about today, so many things that you've been able to share and promote. So with that, I really appreciate it. Chief, Patrick, can you please tell the listeners where they can find you, where they can find your material, and anything else you want to close with?
Yeah, right on. I mean, that's, again, one of the things I like to tell cops all the time too. If you find yourself in that position, give yourself a little grace. Also,
For sure.
I hate it when people say, "Oh, the bad apples," the bad cops. Sure, every once in a while, cops do some silly things, but we don't hire them. We don't hire bad cops. We in this country, we overtask and under-resource cops, and so what we do is we break them. We hire good people, and then we break them, and then we discard them. And I think that's the model that needs to change. And again, that's why wellness is so passionate. I'm so passionate about it, and that we could talk for hours on that. With that in mind, where can you find me? The Coptimizer podcast. It's on it's on YouTube. It's on iTunes, Google Play, all the platforms. And I do write primarily on LinkedIn, but I just recently started on Substack as well. So you can find me at the Coptimizer or Patrick Flannelly on Coptimizer on Substack, or you can just email me, PJ Flannelly, PJFLANNELLY @gmail.com. And
hopefully people can learn from our mistakes, from our successes, our shared stories. And yeah, 100%. I'm very grateful to have connected and had these meaningful conversations on here today, but also, off recording. So very much appreciate the mentorship that you've shared with me and the collaboration here. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.